In this episode, I had the privilege of having a conversation with Dr. David Patrick Harry from Church of the Eternal Logos. I'm extremely grateful for him for taking the time to sit down with me and share some of his valuable insights despite my channel still being in its earliest form. In our conversation, Dr. David Patrick Harry touches on an array of topics, and I'm sure for many this conversation will be filled with breadcrumbs which they can follow further down the rabbit hole. We touch on the problem of modernity, the paradigmatic differences between Premodernism and Postmodernism, and also how Orthodoxy fits into that picture. Along the way, we also pass by figures such as Marshall McLuhan and Terence McKenna, and Dr. David Patrick Harry even gives a short introduction to philosophical concepts such as Idealism and Phenomenology, as we make our way to Heidegger, technology, and the topic of his dissertation, Transhumanism. Towards the end of our conversation, we even touch on the elusive topic of the Antichrist, and Dr. David Patrick Harry shares a rather interesting anecdote regarding sex magic, one of the most important rocket scientists in history, and L. Ron Hubbard, so that's an interesting story to look forward to. He also gives some of his thoughts and advice regarding independent academic work and the future thereof. If you like what you hear, you can find more of his work at Church of the Eternal Logos or his personal channel, Dr. David Patrick Harry. In our conversation, I also experienced a power outage, but luckily the audio was salvaged. I'm still finding the best ways to preserve the quality of these recordings, but I'll hope you'll enjoy it as is. Strap in, it's a rather wild ride. Let's go. That's what I want to emphasize. I want to thank you for taking the time, and I feel especially privileged because I feel I might be one of the first people talking to you since you've officially gotten those two letters abbreviation in front of your name. So thanks, Dr. David Patrick Harry. How's the title feeling? How's it suiting you?
I feel very relieved. So yes, you are the first person that I'll be doing an interview with since attaining the PhD. And it was a long, arduous journey, but I'm very happy to be done with it and ready to publish my dissertation. So I'm ready to publish that as a book, and just excited to build and pursue new goals in the future.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think a bunch of us are. I think there are a few people who follow you and that follow the Church of the Eternal Logos kind of as flies on the wall, you know. I kind of, before we get into the conversation, and I really do want to touch on your dissertation, I also just want to take the time to mention that in March 2020, I first heard of the Orthodox Church, and I came straight through that Jonathan Peugeot, Jordan Peterson pipeline. I think there's a rather famous podcast where Jordan is crying, and it's just out of when he's back from like his little time off, and he's still super
I was
ill.
back from when he just came back from Russia after the benzo stuff.
Yeah, and you can still see in his like physicality and his physique is kind of he's you can see in that interview he's still going through a lot, and Jonathan was talking to him, and he had this kind of demeanor, and I think like a lot of young guys, I was turned on to Jordan Peterson, and during that time I was super involved with the Hare Krishnas and a lot of very typical. But I was super involved with them and a few Eastern stuff, and I saw this interview, and it just I first heard of this way of this Christianity. Jonathan Peugeot was talking about a Christianity I'd never heard before. The way he was talking about it, and that put down some breadcrumbs. And by July, I went and attended my first liturgy. By September, I decided to become a catechumen. And
glory to
by
God.
The end of that, glory to God. By the end of that year, I was listening. I found you, and I must. I just want to thank you because I think you've acted as a bridge for a lot of people coming from the New Age. I'm sure many of the people who talk to you mention that, and that's kind of the sphere you've been moving in for like the past few years. But it's been really valuable. I remember going back home for Christmas holidays just after I had found Orthodoxy, and I was still flooded, of course, with this very different alternative worldview, and trying to bridge the gap and make sense of it. And also something I do want to ask you about a bit later is a bit of the allure for Orthodoxy was I had a bit of an esoteric allure, or something was pulling me, which I thought like, oh, perhaps I can kind of still hold on to this weird worldview while being a Christian. That was my
Right.
initial thoughts of it, and you really helped clarify some things and bridge the gap. So yeah, just a little backstory and a little bit of a thank
Well,
you.
I appreciate that. Thank you for those kind words, and I'm humbled if my content had helped in any way. But you're right, I do kind of my apologetics for Orthodox Christianity are often geared towards people coming from psychedelic spirituality, occultism, New Age spirituality, or people that were spiritual without religious, which is kind of a demographic term for a lot of people that fit in a general category. So, trying to build sort of intellectual, theological bridges from a lot of the reasons why Western, formerly Protestant Christian Western people get into the mystical dimension of those practices. So, occultism, New Age, psychedelics, these are explicitly mystical orientations that Protestantism doesn't really have because it's such a intellectual um, recognition of one's faith in Jesus Christ, and then sola fide, the five solas, mean that as long as you have Scripture, as long as you believe in Christ and you've accepted it as your Savior, and you made your altar call in 1987, you're good to go. But a lot of young people are looking for something deeper, and that's why they go to raves. That's why they take psychedelics, and it does open up to a real reality. And I think Orthodoxy provides a holistic paradigm that doesn't neglect or reject these things as being real experiences for people, but provides a better understanding that we live adjacent to a noetic realm in which demons and angels exist, and it's our imagination. It's this noetic dimension of ourselves that's able to pierce that veil. And when you take psychedelics, that's what it is. It's an altering of the psyche in which the natural curtains or barriers of reality are sort of pushed away, and you don't know what you're contacting. But yeah, so I appreciate your kind words, because that is the kind of apologetic bridge that most of my work is built.
Yeah, actually, I want to jump off of that because seeing that you're passionate about these things because this is exactly where you come from. You've kind of walked that journey. You've noticed some things. Things have
Hmm.
opened up. You've come to the end of the rabbit hole, which is a lovely way I've heard you refer to it,
Right.
which is Christ. Like once you've opened all the boxes and you've done all these things, chanted all the mantras, done all the yantras, whatever. At the end of it, there sits Christ waiting for you. I want to ask you about this. When I started becoming Orthodox, and even after my baptism, I realized I had recognized certain things intellectually. I had some experiences experientially through the liturgy and through trying to be Orthodox, participating in the fasting and doing those things, trying to kind of uh, slowly take in that Orthodox phronema or ethos, as they call it. I still realized that even after the baptism, there were many residuals like lingering from this new age and psychedelic worldview, which is very rooted in experiences. People that get intrigued into those things, they get sucked into it because like you experience real stuff. You can start chanting the mantras. You can start doing like for me the Hare Krishna mantra was probably the one I really clicked into and started chanting a lot. And some things do happen. You start
Right.
experiencing changes in your consciousness and in how the world presents itself to you, kind of through your subjective lens being altered and these sort of things. And I realized after becoming Orthodox that I would do my Orthodox practice, and then occasionally that previous worldview would be like just lurking around the corner, trying to infiltrate and or still affect me in certain ways.
Hmm.
I would like to know, what has your experience been? It's been a few years now since you've been baptized, and you've clearly started adopting this Orthodox view even deeper and deeper, having your dissertation written
Hmm.
out of this Orthodox perspective. I just want to know, now where you're sitting right here, compared to perhaps that first year after your baptism, after having already been Orthodox, uh, do you feel a lot in you has changed in the way you see the world, in your understanding of Christ, in your understanding of the Orthodox ethos, the actual embodiment of it? I'd love to hear a little bit more as someone who's actually, yeah, come from a similar place and who has also been in Orthodoxy a bit longer. Yeah, would you mind telling me a bit more how like
Sure. Um,
those two differ?
so typically, I'm going to hit on a few different angles regarding that question. Is it's not always some sort of mystical, blissful experience when people convert to Orthodoxy. And um, when people think of these sort of euphoric, transformative experiences, they think of, well, what people often describe when they take psychedelics or they have some sort of um, euphoria when they travel or go to a new spiritual setting or something like that. And certainly there's a lot of excitement. So people learn about this new form of Christianity, although it's the oldest form, right? I mean, we're talking about the essentially Byzantine theology, which is differentiated from Latin Christianity, specifically post the schism. So before the schism, there was just one church, and that church was defined by the councils, and that church was really defined what we call, or what Father John Meindorf calls, Byzantine theology. When you come into the church, you're essentially, when you're baptized, you spit on Satan, and you're essentially saying game on. And this is why we always welcome people into the church as like, welcome to the arena, welcome home. And the welcome to the arena is a recognition that spiritual warfare is actually going to ramp up. And so when I was brought into my parish, I was in between an older man in his 50s and then an older woman who was in her 70s. And their experiences were very different than mine. So mine was laden with all the temptations that I dealt with and bad habits and semi-addictions that I had leading into my journey into Orthodoxy, like ramped up the weeks, months, but specifically the 2 weeks before being brought into the church. And this is part of the spiritual warfare. And spiritual warfare in Orthodoxy is understood first and foremost as part of the logismy, these mental images that infiltrate our mind. And so the imagination, your ability to think about the future and reflect on the past and be present in the, and have self-awareness in the present moment, this dimension, where is it? Is it just brain synapses? This would be the sort of transhumanist functionalist definition of mind. Or is it something that's actually outside space and time? It's actually something that pierces this veil into the noetic realm. And this is why we are like the angels and demons, but we're something more. And this is for Lucifer's or Satan's jealousy, is that we actually have a physical body, that we have these noetic capabilities, but we're also within space and time, and therefore we can have experiences, and we can make good decisions and bad decisions, but we can repent from those bad decisions, and so there's opportunity for personal growth. And so the imagination, where exactly is it? It's the imagination and these mental images where spiritual warfare ramps up. Everybody's had the experience of maybe going on top of a tall rooftop, and all of a sudden you have this weird image of you should jump off, or these weird things that pop in your head, or weird, if you struggle with lust, these weird sexual images that may come at the most like inappropriate times. This is spiritual warfare. And for us Orthodox Christians, it's becoming more conscientious and aware of these mental images and not accepting them. So it's not a sin when these mental images enter your mind, but once we accept these mental images and we start to play with them and imagine them, now they begin to stimulate the body, and the road toward the actual engagement of the sin is already underway. And really, sin begins once you've entertained and accepted the idea. So I say all that because in regards to journeying into Orthodoxy, certainly the temptations, it's not like for some people it is. Some people, they get brought in and it's incredibly euphoric. All the temptations they struggled with sort of are washed away. And so that's where this is a very, very personal experience. And our hierarchy within Orthodoxy, regards to epistemology, a fancy term for the study of knowledge, begins with revelation and then goes to personal faith and subjective experience, and then goes into rationalism. And this will come up. I'll come back to this point as we discuss the dissertation and things happening in culture, like the narrative of the woke right and stuff like that. But becoming Orthodox, I think, and living the life and trying to grow in the faith and participate in an Orthodox community, um, it's these what we would call providential experiences, or if you're New Age or you know secular, maybe you'd call them Jungian synchronicities. It's these providential experiences that once you've adopted, or once you've confessed, and you truly do believe that God became man, which is the only way in which eternity can actually bridge temporal existence. So when we're talking about avatars of Hinduism or something like that, these are not full incarnational deities that unify human nature with divine nature. These are emanations. These are representations. And so there is no religion, Christianity being the only one that explicitly states that God, eternity, actually pierced into the material realm and was fully man with human genitalia, um, and sanctified human nature, sanctified human will, and demonstrates what it looks like in its perfection. So adopting that belief system and then living that life, it's these crazy experiences and the pursuit of goals and the trying to develop further in life. Could be getting married, could be jobs, could be whatever it is, and praying about it, participating in the spiritual life, and then seeing how these things come about. It's like this is where your relationship with God really comes to the forefront, and this is where my belief in Christ is not dependent upon my logical apologetics to make transcendental arguments for God's existence, so that you know. Number theory, logic, these types of things can actually exist. That's a logical reason for it. But if my faith was only built on that, my faith can be washed away with new evidence. What really deepens one's personal faith is actually walking the walk, seeing how God works in your life, seeing how your prayers, like this ongoing conversation you're having with the Trinity, is actually ongoing through the daily experiences you're having. That is what deepens your faith, because you can't deny that, but also you can't explain that to somebody. This is why with Orthodoxy, we don't do a lot of street preaching and evangelical activity in that way, because we believe that it's a calling. I mean, you have to be a catechumen for a year before you even get brought into the church, because we want serious people. And so this lived experience, this is what is so important about actually becoming Orthodox. It's not about being able to debate. It's not about all the arguments. It's not about church history. All these things are great and reinforce the validity of Orthodoxy being the authentic tradition of Christ and the apostles. But it's actually living it and participating and growing in life and seeing how God works and allowing God's will to actually shape your destiny. There's so many things in my life, and we can get into it, but certainly finishing my PhD, my whole reason for going to university was to become a university professor. I wanted to have my tweed jackets and my briefcase and tell the students when my study hours are, my office hours and stuff like that. And it turned out once I was living in Berkeley, California, and actually doing the PhD, I saw arguably the most famous philosopher still living, John Searle. He's an analytical philosopher and was tenured professor at Berkeley, get fired. And if he can get fired, anybody can get fired. And tenure doesn't mean anything. And his was on a claim that he sexually harassed a woman because all he did was ask her if she wanted to go to dinner. And so I don't know, not even get into details. It's just this is the landscape of modern academia. And for people to devote their careers of doing, writing an academic work takes years, to write books and articles and do all this research, and then the university can fire you at will. My response was, damn, I guess I don't want to work at a university. And this is why I created the YouTube channel Church of the Eternal Logos as an outlet in which I could do semi-academic work, basically research on various topics, and then present it from an Orthodox perspective. So that came from my journey into Orthodoxy. So it's me becoming Orthodox, which then felt the pressure about conforming to DEI standards and LGBTQ stuff and inclusivity and eventually saying, well, geez, if I'm truly a Christian and I believe all these things, I can't even participate in the system. And I didn't know what to do, and that caused a lot of existential angst. But praying about it, thinking about it, the idea was, well, I guess we'll just use social media and YouTube and create a sort of my own platform to do research and talk about topics and educate, which is what I love to do. So that is just one small little example, and I'm sorry I'm rambling on this larger question, but that emphasizes this spiritual journey and personal experience of how um, you just let God begin to sort of shape you and take your life where it goes. And I do one-on-one, so I've talked with so many men, 40 years and younger, basically, about this exact thing. They come into the church, they've red pilled, they've gone down the conspiracies. Orthodoxy makes a lot of sense. They're going to church, but maybe they don't have their career in place. Maybe their wife thinks this is a cult and she's very against it, and so all these then problems emerge. This is part of the journey. This is part of this spiritual hardening. And in Orthodoxy, the reason why it's difficult is just like if going to the gym, you stress the muscle to tear it down so that it builds back better. And this understanding of how the physical body becomes stronger is the same thing when we understand our sort of spiritual body and our spiritual will. This is why fasting and ascetic practices are so important, because the self-denial is not saying that creation is bad. It's saying that creation is found and perceived in its correct harmony when we understand it in moderation, when we can limit ourselves and limit our will. So, roundabout way to sum up, that was a roundabout way to talk about becoming Orthodox. One of the biggest things, I think, is just living the lifestyle, having faith, and then letting God work in your life. And these are the things that you can't convince your buddy about. You like, they may say, "Yo, what's that, all that Orthodoxy stuff?" You can't really convince that, well, yeah, I've been actually praying for 8 months, and all these weird things have happened, and so many prayers have actually been answered, and there's clearly, something happening here that's deepening my faith. But that's what really deepens your faith. You can give your buddies rational arguments for why God has to exist, and then arguments why God needs to be a Trinity, but that is not the same thing as the personal experience. And that's one of the reasons why, and I'm going to end on this, but I'm sure it's going to connect with something we're going to talk about later, is that Orthodoxy is a pre-modern worldview. And really that's what trad Catholicism is too, although you could certainly make an argument it's already been affected by modernity. But I did a stream last night talking about the woke right, and I think the lens that is missing in the analysis of this cultural conversation is that the postmodern left, the progressive left that essentially believes in relativism and subjectivity, and postmodernism is sort of defined by the rejection of meta-narratives. So objective truth being one, the history of Western metaphysics being one. So universality, linguistic claims of reality that are universal, they reject. However, they reject modernity, and modernity is this project, this enlightenment project that we're all living in, that elevates individualism over tradition and community, that sanctifies rationalism as the means to ultimate knowing, that believes that scientific method is going to come to full knowledge of the universe, and that through technological advancement we will essentially move into a utopia, because modernity is defined by this underlying narrative of unending linear progress. And so postmodernism is the recognition that this unending linear progress is a lie. And the 20th century was the century that more people died in than any other century in history. And if that's the case, then modernity itself as a project is flawed. And so postmodernity is a recognition of that. But as Christos Yanaros, a famous Greek Orthodox theologian and philosopher, talks about, is that postmodernism is, and the postmodern turn in academia, the postmodern um, state of affairs is actually something to be welcomed by the Orthodox Christian, because it means if modernity is deconstructed, it allows for a return to a pre-modern world. And so the difference between postmodernism and pre-modernism is well, there's a few things. They agree first and foremost on the rejection of modernity and this sort of project, this rationalistic, non-theistic project for utopian existence. They both reject that. However, the pre-modern worldview maintained this onto-relational dynamic in which subjective experience is actually elevated, right? We just talked about this hierarchy of epistemology, and if that's the case, then The beginning point of postmodernism is that, okay, it's just all subjective. We all have our own truth. Orthodoxy says, well, no, you don't all have your own truth because we maintain the historical metaphysical foundation of Western civilization or Christendom, because Orthodoxy is more Eastern than Western, but say metaphysics generally speaking until we get to the Renaissance. But that more traditional metaphysic maintains, so it maintains objectivity and still elevates subjective experience, which is all that postmodernism has. And so really pre-modern religiosity, and this is why on the right wing we're also seeing a return to paganism. I think what's happening with the woke right, or the defining of the woke right, is that the MAGA movement, Peterson, Douglas Murray, James Lindsay, these people represent a sort of classical liberalism that is clinging on to the last vestiges of modernity. And this is why the MAGA movement and the MAGA administration is so heavily tied with Zionism and then technocracy. So Elon Musk and some of the Silicon oligarchs, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, the list goes on. But these guys are these Silicon Valley oligarchs, and technocracy is the endpoint of the modernist project. Transhumanism is the ultimate fulfillment of Enlightenment humanism. And so they are all banded together in a way, and whether this is conscious or not, I don't think it's necessarily conscious. I mean, this has to do with paradigms and our presuppositions of reality. And so these people are clinging on to this modernist project, and what's happening is that more and more young people are really wanting a pre-modern world. And so this is why the memes of the crusades and stuff are so powerful, is that what young people are actually wanting is a world in which young men are destined to be married. They have women that are marriageable, available. They have some type of inheritance, could be land, a house, a skill set. Maybe your dad was a blacksmith. There's a national identity, there's a racial identity, there's a religious identity. All these things modernity has destroyed. This is why modernity is defined by the disenchantment, that rationalism has disenchanted any sort of mystical dimension to human experience. And so what we're seeing is a return to a pre-modern re-enchantment. And so all of that, which will come back later, I'm sure, is to talk about the valorization of subjective experience and deepening your personal faith by seeing how your life progresses in relationship to Christ.
Thank you for that. There's so many things I want to like latch on and follow through, but at the end, I guess this is one I do want to ask you, because I know you are a guy that you were really interested in Terence McKenna. I think you spent, I'm sure, hundreds, maybe over 1,000, maybe even more hours listening to that guy. And McKenna's one of the few guys, like when I talk about like this other worldview that occasionally just keeps on like chirping things here in the back of my mind. He's one of those guys, and of course he is quite silly and odd. And I thank God for Orthodoxy, which gives me like a good frame to start viewing these sort of things. How do you think an idea such as the archaic revival, how do you think that clicks in perhaps with this yearning for the pre-modern? Do you think it's like because probably the way Terence McKenna describes this archaic revival is a way that you do see things manifesting in our current time, like people who aren't religious necessarily, they might yearn for especially these like well, not necessarily the postmodern folk. I don't want to classify them all because some of them are quite impressive, but some people do yearn towards this space where which isn't monogamous, polyamory, a different way of relating to a world of the gods, perhaps, instead of the monotheistic God. Do you think that's coming out of the same impulse for this pre-modern space? And do you think that these people, perhaps someone like McKenna talking about the archaic revival, do you think they're just taking it too far, and because they're missing the centrality of Christ, because they don't recognize Christ or the Christian worldview, do you think that's perhaps a natural? Well, I just want to hear whatever thoughts might have popped up in your mind regarding that.
So, regards to the general theme of their archaic revival, so McKenna believed that as industrial technological civilizations move forward, there was or what he viewed, and I actually agree with the general theory. Now, I'm going to give caveats to it, but It's the idea that scarification, so tattooing, piercing, multiple sexual partners, polyamory, these things are returned back to an archaic lifestyle. For him, that meant more of a tribal shamanistic formation. And so that's a little bit older and more primitive than what I would say would be pre-modern. That would be almost pre-civilizational to some degree. And so, but I do believe that this impulse that McKenna's highlighting is true, and McKenna got this theory part and parcel through Marshall McLuhan. And so Marshall McLuhan was the great Canadian. He was actually a devout Catholic, adult convert in his life, but he was a media analyst and essentially was the founder of like the communications department. And so he did all these theories back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, already speculating that the ways in which we receive information changes our sensory ratios is what he called them. And so he has this famous line that the medium is the message, meaning that it's not the medium or the message being, let's say, the latest news today, whatever's happening in the world on May 14th, 2025. How do we receive the message? What's the medium? Well, historically, it was, reading. So it was the printed word, and then it turned into the radio, and then it turned into the television, and now it's turned into social media. And so his argument is that the medium in which we engage in mass communication actually alters the sensorial relationship that man has in his relationship to the environment and how he attains information. And his argument was that the literate man, the man of the manuscript and book culture, is a man that is essentially formed out of Christianity. And he has all these things that, the reading man has a more distant vision. He can sit, for example, reading is a hot medium, and so a lot of information can be taken up, but it's an active. So a hot medium takes action. Right, so television, for example, is a cold medium. You can sit there and you're receptive to the message. To read, you actually have to actively engage with it and use your energy. So that's a hot medium. He defined radio as a hot medium. Anyways, my point is, you can get into the work of Marshall McLuhan, and McKenna was very aware of McLuhan. He's a huge fan of McLuhan. And McLuhan was not a hippie or part of the counterculture or psychedelic movement per se, although the counterculture made him popular, because one of his theories was about the global village. And this is where McKenna is sort of semi-inspired through his technological theories, is that he believes, too, in McLuhan's theory, that digital electronic communication is actually altering the sensory ratios and moving us from a linear man to an auditory man. And the auditory man is the archaic man. He's actually the man pre-Christianity. And the auditory man is defined by impulses. He's defined by drum beats, tribal music, right? So when we look at rave culture, look at what are the biggest songs in the world and stuff like this. He's arguing that there's all these presuppositions built into the medium, and that the auditory man believes he's the center of the world, because the way that we receive auditorial information is that we're always at the center of the world, and sound then is like a concentric circle around us at all points. And so every person is the center of their own concentric circle. And so it kind of breeds this sort of isolated perspective of self. And anyways, this is what McLuhan's theory of the global village was. And so he believed that technology was actually moving us from the literate man to the auditorial man, and that the auditorial man is the primitive man. And in this process, because digital technologies actually shrink the size of the planet, because information in Beijing can travel to New York within just a few seconds now, and with social media, everybody's sharing everything, that it shrinks the size of the planet. And essentially we become a global village where everything can be known immediately, just like the news passing in a village. Everybody knows each other, knows what's happening. And so I do see this phenomenon occurring. I wouldn't agree with McKenna and say that what people are longing for is an archaic revival. I would say that that's driven partly from his own hedonism, which is part and parcel of the sort of psychedelic spiritual milieu, although not all of them are hedonistic. I wouldn't say that. But certainly the sort of Western approach, the general gist of psychedelic spirituality is polyamorous, It's all about the sort of phenomenological self-construction of identity, which is part and parcel of the trans agenda as well. So I wouldn't say that what we're trying to do is return to an archaic, maybe for some people, but I think in general, people are trying to flee the um, the 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 forcible conformity of modernity and the pressures of these corporate entities and and this all the debate about fascism and communism and capitalism. This is all modernity. These things didn't exist until the modern period. There was only monarchy back. That's the pre-modern political framework. And so, and we see people like Curtis Yarvin. I don't know if you're familiar with Curtis Yarvin,
Yeah, Mencius
pseudonym
Moldbug.
Mencius
Yeah.
Moldbug. Yeah, so him talking about monarchy. Now he's getting his inspiration from observing how corporations work and basically arguing that a monarchical framework that he believes is resemblant of like a CEO at Apple or something like that, that this is the most efficient framework to get things done, which I agree with. I don't disagree with him on. And he's saying if that's the most efficient, then therefore our political system should also resemble that if we want to have an efficient uh, political regime within our various nation states. So what I would say, though, is already the advocacy for monarchy is really, again, returning back to the pre-modern period. 'Cause that's what the French Revolution was, right? The French Revolution was killing the king. The American Revolution was breaking away from the king. The revolutions that followed in Europe, World War I was about doing away with the monarchy. So returning to monarchy is explicitly a pre-modern appreciation. And I think what's happening is that we're seeing young people, and I don't think it's necessarily conscious. I mean, it's conscious that they're aware, millennials and Gen Zers are aware that they can't afford to buy a home like their parents could. They can't afford to raise a family off one income like their parents could. But are they consciously aware that what they're longing for is something that's more pre-modern, more traditional? Not necessarily. Maybe some people are, but people are consciously aware that this promise of modernity, that every generation was going to be better and better and better and better, and the life was going to get better, and the fact that that's not happened. Look at the cartoons of the Jeffersons from the '60s. Our life looks nothing like that. That was the expectation of where all this was going, and so what we see, really, what it is, it's really gay. It's mass corporations, consumerism. Like that's what the future is. That's what modernity has brought us. And so the postmoderns, this is why I think the people on the right who are sort of shrieking from the frame woke right, which again is ridiculous. I mean, I did a whole stream last night. James Lindsay, I'm no fan of James Lindsay, and Peterson went along with it. But what's happening is that leftist progressives are wanting to flee modernity, and they're fleeing into a postmodern relativism in which everything is allowed and any form of identity can be constructed. Because the disenchantment of modernity is tied with the destruction of identity, right? Because globalism or multinationalism, multiculturalism is the undermining the idea that Irishness is unique and Irish people need to be preserved because Ireland is the country for Irish people, right? This is actually like rhetoric that you could be labeled a Nazi. Well, this was just common sense historically. Um, so the postmodernists are fleeing into a self-constructed identity. And then everybody else, especially all the young people that are fleeing to Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and then really paganism and Stoicism's becoming popular. What do all these things have in common? They're pre-modern, and so they're trying to flee modernity. And this is why James Lindsay said last night the reason why he calls them woke right is because they criticize the system or the status quo from a different direction. So then wokeness for him is really just criticism of modernity and the Enlightenment project, which really then highlights the game. And Zionism is part of the World War II consensus narrative. And so the questioning of Israel right now, and that's why Daryl Cooper and going on Martyr Made podcast talking about Churchill, questioning Churchill, humanizing the Germans during World War II, humanizing the Palestinians and their relationship to Israel since 1948, that this has been so controversial. What's so controversial about it? Well, it's controversial because it undermines the meta narrative of the post-World War consensus, which is the remaining pillar and leg of modernity. And if that's undermined, Well, then, what's wrong with somebody returning back to monarchy? What's wrong with one of these European countries saying, you know what, we just want a monarch now? We're explicitly religious. That is threatening to the system. And so I think that's part and parcel what's happening within culture. And so I wouldn't agree with McKenna insofar as saying that we're returning back to an archaic worldview. I would say some people are. And I would agree with McKenna agreeing with McLuhan about the catalyzation of technology reorienting us to a sort of primitive state, and we're already seeing the IQ decline. The amount that people can pay attention, um, all this stuff is declining, which really is resembling a sort of primitive man.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's actually I really want to get to the transhumanism stuff because I've been thinking about these things uh, quite a lot. Last year I wrote like a mini thesis on Heidegger's article, The Question Concerning Technology, and even though he's not a Christian, it affected me in quite some ways, and it seemed to me that his big threat that he seemed in technology, not necessarily like the actual technology itself, but he had more this essential way of looking at it, that the threat was on this like plane of essence or something like that, and just to sum it up in a nutshell, it seemed that his threat was that the essence of what it means to be human, that is what's being threatened through the technological worldview, which is of course part and parcel of modernity,
Right.
and it seemed to me as if he really saw this as the great threat, as if there was a tipping point where our mode of being would be thoroughly technological, that everything even though we're not necessarily cyborgs or linked to a chip or anything, even though we're just interacting with humans, now all of a sudden our relationship towards our mother or our children or towards education or towards what a dinner is, all these things, now all of a sudden we're approaching it out of this like technological mode. And when that happens, although from the outside looking in, it looks as if humans are just carrying on normal, like it's the same humans, they're still eating and they're still having kids and they're still doing the
Right.
same stuff, but some essential difference has happened. That thing that I read in the article, yeah, that made me wonder, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the transhumanism thing, because I don't understand too much about humanism, but I know there's a physical component to it. There's the biology, there's the chips, there's all these things of like actually altering what it is to be human. But it seems to me there's this another thing going on where technology are altering what it means to be human uh, in this realm of essence. And this is, sorry, there's kind of quite a few questions, but I want to ask you this: to what extent do you think like we can participate in technology? Like even right now, you and me, we're having this
Hmm.
conversation through tech, and to what extent do you think we can do this without slowly but surely having our essence change, and kind of falling trap of this whole transhumanist modern thing, where it's all leading to, like, how do you think we can avoid being caught up in it? Because I'm kind of afraid that even though you follow Orthodox Christianity, and at least there's this faith in Christ, and that Christ redeems us, and as
Hmm.
we're part of the church, and the belief in the Eucharist and all that. But it seems to me there's a possibility that one might approach that as well through this technological mode, like the
Hmm.
where the Eucharist becomes like this. Instead of seeing it for what it is, where one starts seeing it almost that in this instrumental lens, and where like uh, it seems to, like, yeah. Well, the thing I want to point out is like, to what extent do you think that is an actual threat, or do you think the actual threat is more like the physical things changing, like the chip eventually happening, or the Antichrist somehow manifesting through this strange uh, spiral of events, of things happening and connecting together, and um, yeah, uh, that's a bit scattered, but I hope you get the gist, or I would just like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So what you're referring to, because I actually cite that article multiple times in my dissertation regarding technology, because Heidegger is obvious. Anybody who's familiar, so anybody who's not, Heidegger is a phenomenologist, and so after Immanuel Kant, philosophy essentially breaks into two schools: idealism and empiricism. And so you have 19th century British empiricism, which argues so Kant is questioning the knowability of the exterior world. That's essentially what he's doing and undermining the Cartesian project of pure rationalism, the idea that you can just sit with your eyes closed and use reason and come to universal knowledge claims. This was rationalism, which eventually sort of bleeds into idealism. Um, and so Kant says, actually, we can't prove fully that we know the exterior world. It could be a sort of apparition, and that we have these synthetic categories, and that these 12 categories in our mind, and that as sensory reality pushes against these categories, that is the world that we experience. And so we don't know the thing in and of itself. And this was a huge turn in philosophy. And so the methodologies for knowledge are then the Anglosphere, which is what we refer to as the analytical tradition of philosophy. So currently in philosophy, we have the continental tradition and the analytic tradition. The analytic tradition is the Anglo-British tradition, American tradition, that says, okay, well, maybe we don't know the world fully or in and of itself, but if we use empiricism, the scientific method, this is the best we can come to universal truth claims. And the continental tradition, really the European philosophical tradition, says actually the methodology we're using for universal truth claims is the study of the self, phenomenology. And so we're going to study what human subjective experience is like, and therefore, if we do that, we can then make claims about everybody's self and everybody's self experience. So that those are kind of the general two. So Heidegger is part of this phenomenological camp. He's part of the continental tradition, and he believes because of this, he's very ontologically oriented, and that's why his book, Being in Time, is really trying to return back to a sort of ancient Greek philosophical understanding of being. And this is why he was against the modernist technocratic move, and what he referred to and what you're talking about with this sort of instrumental mentality is what he calls enframing, Gestell. And so enframing means that the modernist project and technological advance has framed everything as what he refers to as a, quote, standing reserve and of utility. And so when the modern perspective looks at a beautiful forest, it's not about the aesthetics of it. It's not about the natural beauty. It's about a standing reserve of natural resource for capital gain. That's what he's saying, is that the modernist project of technology enframes everything as a standing reserve of utility. And so a beautiful river is not some mystical, magical piece of nature. It's an opportunity for a hydroelectric plant, which then can build, more cities and then more businesses and this types of things. So he says this is the problem of really the end of the 20th century and moving into the 21st century, is that technology has enframed our world through these sort of instrumental means. And transhumanism does the same thing, because transhumanism is essentially looking at the human embodiment, the biological body, as a manipulatable product. And so personal identity, these things become commodities that can be exchanged, that can be purchased, that can be augmented. And in the same way, so human embodiment, transhumanism is really the endpoint of this enframing process, because it views the human body itself as something that is a standing reserve that can be upgraded and instrumentalized for something better, which is usually like knowledge and immortality is usually it's defined, which is very Gnostic. It's a very Gnostic framework. And Eric Voegelin's written about how contemporary science is a form of Gnosticism, not in the ancient sense or the spiritual sense, but in the presuppositional sense that knowledge is liberatory, biological embodiment is evil, and that we're going to construct and move ourselves into the realm of pleroma, of pure light, which is like utopian transhuman existence. So, concerning then the Eucharist, Orthodoxy it is, like I said, an onto-relational paradigm. It's pre-modern. And so people who approach the Eucharist as, if you're going to, the way that you described it is the sort of carryover of Heidegger's framing into the Orthodox Church. Well, I'm not really concerned with that because modernity itself is the enframing process. So every modern person who enters an Orthodox church already views things in these instrumental means. And so it's returning to an ancient worldview, which is non instrumental, and saying that actually the highest importance is this mystical, non rational, subjective experience that you have with God, which is ontologically oriented and sanctified through the incarnation. And that this is the whole point of reality. So that fundamental principle divorces the paradigm from what develops from scholasticism, the Renaissance, and the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, the scientific enterprise, the Royal Society's founded in like around 1650. So that is when modern science essentially divorces itself from its esoteric past of alchemy and the transmutation of lead into gold, all this stuff. These are the precursors of science, and transhumanists agree that this is the earliest indications of the transhumanist yearnings, the quest for the elixir of immortality, according to Nick Bostrom and Max Moore, that this is the earliest transhumanist quest and finding a sort of material, again, an instrumental means to attain immortality, which we believe that immortality cannot be attained through any instrumental means, that science will never provide immortality, or some magical means will never provide immortality. The only way you can attain immortality is to become like Christ, who's already immortal and took on non-immortal form so that it itself could become immortal. So, yeah, I'm not sure because the question was kind of there's multiple things in there, so I'm not sure how much I addressed it. But regarding to Heidegger's framing, and so Heidegger, because he's a phenomenologist, he's very much ontologically oriented, and therefore his criticism of modernity coincides with Orthodoxy's criticism. So because Heidegger is wanting to return philosophy back to an ontologically oriented sort of ancient Greek framework, in the spirit of like Parmenides, then he is already adopting the onto-relational paradigm of orthodoxy, which is part and parcel of that whole worldview. So we make the same criticism. It's just we have a very different prescription to the problem than Heidegger does.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said. It's as if yeah, that kind of answered a lot. I like that how you said by the time we're approaching orthodoxy as moderns, we're already encapsulated.
We're
in
already
this.
inframed.
We're already
Yeah,
we're already inframed. But orthodoxy is a remedy for it. In fact, just the way it's things are done in general. There's layers upon layers upon layers of participating in the Orthodox Church that is like a direct remedy for that. And my priest and I, we had this exact conversation during Pascha. So which is amazing. I want to ask one or two last. Well, let's ask one big question, and then I want to ask you kind of a bit of a selfish question aimed at because that'll be an academic question.
Okay.
About the process of writing, but I watched your stream about your dissertation, and you kind of thinking about some titles you've been playing with and looking for ideas and so. And one of the titles which I really like that you've mentioned is From Adam to Antichrist or something in that line, which tells a little bit about your dissertation. This is probably not the the best question without a bunch of the context, but it's a question that often pops up in Christian circles all over, and Protestants particularly seem to be concerned about this figure which I'm about to mention. And I noticed that when the new Pope was elected, my mom was reading some WhatsApp message she got or something she saw on Facebook. She was like, someone's saying that this new Pope is the Antichrist, and I was just like, oh my gosh. Okay, but so how do we conceptualize the Antichrist through this? Well, the work you've been doing on transhumanism in light of Orthodoxy, the Antichrist is such an elusive, vague, weird figure to try and make sense of. Like, what does it mean? Like, it's always such an odd thing. Um, what are some ways that one can understand a bit more or conceptualize a bit more what that even means, or who like how to think about that, because I think a lot of people fall in the trap, especially depending on the specific Protestant denominations, calling like some pope or some president, or everyone's been the Antichrist, from Obama to Trump to the Pope. It's kind of like calling people a Nazi. Yeah, how can we productively is perhaps not even the right word. Productively seems like such a modern word to use. How can we productively think about it? But yeah, how should we think about this term?
So you're totally accurate when you talk about Protestant speculation in regards to eschatology. And so I would say one of the reasons why it abounds so much is because Protestantism is essentially defined by personal interpretation of Scripture, and then people's reading of Revelation. They come up with all these new interpretations and then lay that onto contemporary history and stuff like that. Now, I'd say I'm guilty of that to some degree. However, I would make the major caveat that we as Orthodox never claim timelines. What we use and how we look at eschatology is that we believe from Christ forward, certain saints and certain individuals have been graced with visions as prophetic warnings. And so prophecies regarding end times are not descriptions necessarily of something that is inevitable. It's descriptions of something that is going to be the consequence of a progression or a trajectory that we're currently on. And so therefore, through repentance and coming back to Christ, we can always negotiate the end times to some degree. Now, God already knows when it's in because he's outside space and time. We're within the continuum of history. So history is still moving forward. We're maybe somewhere here. Maybe the end point's here or here. We're not sure. But as we move through history, the church teaches that as people, as a collective, and individuals, but as a collective, repent and move back towards a Christian framework, God pushes the end times back, because the end times is dependent upon the spiritual state of the planet itself. This is why they accept the rule of the Antichrist. Now, in regards to the Antichrist, this is a figure, according to both Revelation but the Orthodox tradition. He's going to rule a one-world planet. He's going to be Jewish. He's going to rule this global government from Jerusalem. He's going to proclaim himself as God. He's going to perform various miracles. He's going to be deemed as being responsible for the ending of like a great global calamity, war, disease, famine, this type of stuff. And because people are suffering so much, they're going to warmly welcome and venerate a man who can bring sort of material abundance. But this is also going to come with obtaining a mark, which allows you to participate in his global economic structure. And so these are just rough outlines. So can Donald Trump or Barack Obama be the Antichrist? No, because they're not Jewish. Because this has to be, according to tradition and prophecy, this has to be the inversion of Christ, right? So, and you can take that further in regards to looking at Kessler's 13th tribe theory in regards to Ashkenazis related to Khazars. That's a whole other thing, but I'll leave that alone. But the Antichrist then is a figure who, the difference between speculation about Antichrist now and before is that we have the digital technologies and the global communication systems that a global centralized government is actually potentially possible. Now, this is the ultimate goal of somebody like Elon Musk, who's a technocrat. So the technocrats, and same with Larry Ellison, the head of Oracle, who Trump famously signed with Sam Altman and Masayoshi Son, the CEO of SoftBank, to create the Stargate project, which is a $500 billion investment in the development of AI in the U.S. so that we can win the AI arms race. Because right now there is an arms race. It's much like the nuclear bomb And then from what I'm hearing is that China's right now is in the lead, and this is why this is like an existential threat to Silicon Valley, is that China's essentially stole some of their secrets, and they've developed their own AI system, and it's out competing what people like ChatGPT and Grok are making here in the West, and therefore there's a great emphasis that we gotta make sure that we win this race, because the belief right now amongst the geopolitical elite is whoever gets the first ultimate AI wins, because their AI will be able to defeat all the other AIs immediately, and therefore nobody will be you'll essentially be on top of the global pyramid. And that's what we're facing right now, is we are in a serious arms race between Russia, China, Middle Eastern countries. I've heard that some of these Middle Eastern countries have spent tons of money on developing their AI systems to compete. And of course, then in the West, but we have all these private corporations where some of these other countries, the national state has quite a bit of influence on the development of these technologies. I'm sure they do. I mean, the connections between CIA and the deep state and Silicon Valley are very deep. Anyways, I digress. So transhumanism is very interesting because transhumanism, out of all the post-humanity, so post-humanity is like a sub-discipline within philosophy, and almost all the post-humanities are anti the anthropocentrism of humanism. So they want to decenter the human subject as the central focus of all philosophical and epistemological inquiry. I know that's a fancy way to say they want academia to no longer focus on people. They'd rather it focus on the planet and animals and abstract things. So post-humanity then is moving into a post-humanism state of affairs. Transhumanism is the continuation of Enlightenment humanism, but it's a transition of humanism into a post-humanity. So it's very subtle, but it's actually a different line. It's part of the post-humanity philosophical tradition, but it's unique in that it actually maintains Enlightenment humanism, at least it perceives that it does. And so, therefore, it's a continuation of modernity. So, transhumanism views itself as the epitome of modernity. And that modernity leading to this linear, unending progress will lead towards man transcending his own limitations and then essentially becoming his own God. So, then history is a sort of Hegelian apotheosis that's not the Geist, the spirit becoming sentient, it's that you and I are plugged into the AI that became sentient, and in so far as that is true, then the AI works through us, and we are then fully sentient. And so, what my dissertation, and I could explain because it's a bigger context, but essentially what I'm arguing is that transhumanism is a competing narrative of deification. And so my project is utilizing a post-secular framework. So post-secularism is a theory developed by Jürgen Habermas and Charles Taylor that argue that in technologically advanced industrial societies, so first world nations basically, secular narratives or secularism, but secular ideologies, could be communism, could be Black Lives Matters, have essentially taken on the ultimate meaning process of religion. And therefore, religious studies is always, historically, especially through the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, is like, what is the definition of religion, right? We got to define what religion is, and everything that fits in that category, we can study it and define it as religion. Well, that has been the process of religious studies in academia, but post-secularism, which really emerged at the end of the 20th century, is the argument and the claim that this delineation between secular and religious has totally broken down. It's kind of pointless, and that people are clearly adopting secular ideologies as sort of totalizing religious narratives for their lives. And scientism is one of this. This is why you can now, through a post-secular lens, you can analyze science as religion, because there is no meaningful distinction anymore, and so you don't have to jump through all the hoops academically as a researcher to try to like define terms, like how are you saying that science is a religion? Well, okay, post-secularism. Now we can just begin at the ground point that I don't need to define science's religious revelatory text. We're saying that it's an ultimate meaning process. So, anyways, okay. Transhumanism then is a narrative of human deification. Human deification is takes on many forms, but it is the ultimate narrative of meaningfulness, because it means that this is the sort of teleology of human embodiment and being human. So transhumanism then is competing, what I'm arguing, with other forms of deification. And I utilize Orthodox Christian theosis, the idea that we become synergized with God's uncreated energies: love, truth, reason, logic, honor, glory, compassion, mercy, long suffering, piety, light. These energies, when we embody them, we are energized by them, and we then act as a conduit for God into the world. And this is the role of every Orthodox Christian. That's what a saint is. So a saint then is kind of glowing because he is a conduit for God in the world. And that's the goal of every Christian, is to become a conduit. And that's what it means to be Christ-like, right? Because Christ was bringing the Father, the knowledge of the Father, into the world. So this is what theosis is about. And so what I do is I argue that within the post-secular moment, as defined by Habermas and Taylor, transhumanism is a competing narrative of deification along with the pre-modern worldview of orthodoxy and theosis. I make the claim, and I build upon some research done by actually a Marxist, Canadian Marxist scholar, David Noble, but he wrote a book called The Religion of Technology. And in it, and then I develop what he presents even further in my paper in chapter 1, which highlights that this unique eschatological framework gets developed within Western Christianity beginning in the 800s. So this is after Charlemagne is anointed as emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. We have what's called the Carolingian era. And the Carolingian era had its own Renaissance. It's referred to as the Carolingian Renaissance, in which all these water mills and mechanical technology gets developed to make labor easier and more efficient. And in this time period, in the mid 800s, a gentleman named John Scotus Erigena, an Irish Neoplatonist who was the court philosopher of the Carolingians, he argues that technology is actually a form of grace by God that allows humanity to return back to Edenic perfection. And therefore, all of technological advancement is redeeming the attributes that Adam lost in the fall. So technology is advancing knowledge of the natural world. Technology is advancing our abilities over nature. These were things that Adam already had in the garden. This is the idea. And so technology is a journey, a historical journey that is taking us back to pre-lapsarian perfection, which is a fancy term to say Edenic perfection. So what was perceived to be perfect in the Garden of Eden. And this idea was very, very powerful. And so chapter 1, I demonstrate the continuity of this idea that technology would redeem the lost attributes of the fall, from John Scotus Erigena in the 800s through Hugh of St. Victor, the great canon who wrote his book on the categorization of knowledge at the time, and to Roger Bacon, and to people like Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola during the Renaissance, and how this began to influence the reformers. So during the 1100s, another gentleman comes on the scene named Giacomo Fiore, who was a Catholic abbot, and he believed, according on one day, believe it was leading up to Pascha, or maybe it was Pentecost, he believed that the Holy Spirit gave him a vision in which history was defined by 3 dispensational periods. The period of the Father, which represented the Genesis, the creation of man, up to Christ. And then you had the age of the Son, which was Jesus Christ, up to really Giacomo Fiore. And that was the age of the priest. And then you had Giacomo Fiore, who had this prophetic vision, who claimed that we were entering the age of the Holy Spirit, in which the authority of the church no longer mattered. God was everywhere present. He dwelled into the hearts of individuals. And so personal piety and sanctity were the only things that mattered. Sacraments, so he was very dismissive of sacraments and stuff like this. So you could already kind of see the beginnings of Protestantism here. And he believed that this third age, the age of the Holy Spirit, was an age of enlightened, illuminated men that would lead to this millenarian perfected utopia. And so this eschatological framework that we're getting ready to enter into this age of elevated spiritual men in a utopian existence got combined with John Scotus Erigena's elevation of technology as being redemptive. And this develops through Roger Bacon and all these people that we are on the precipice through technology of entering into this golden age. And what I highlight is that this was the narrative throughout the 16th century, the most magical century in Europe. So you have people like John Dee, and you have the Rosicrucian order that develops in the 16th century and then kind of dissipates there in the 17th and the 1600s. And this all had to do with science and this technological movement shifting out of its esoteric framework. So it goes from this explicitly Christian, Catholic, then you have the Protestant Reformation. It takes on this Hermetic, Gnostic, Kabbalistic dimension to it in the Rosicrucians, and you begin to get the formation of Freemasonry and stuff like this. And so this narrative of God as the great architect and us participating in the perfection of his creation and returning back to Eden is really the beginning progenitor of transhumanism. And then I highlight how transhumanism, the continuation of this, how chapter 3 is how orthodoxy is an ulterior paradigm, a pre-modern paradigm of human deification. And then in chapter 4, as you're talking about referring back to Adam to Antichrist, then I highlight that from the Orthodox Christian perspective, this entire journeying from the 800s to the present is really a theological heresy that has developed in transhumanism that wants to return back to Adam, perfected Adam, where Orthodox Christianity wants to return to the second Adam, Jesus Christ, the incarnation. That this whole transhumanism thing is actually denying the incarnation. And what Yuval Noah Harari wants to do in his book Homo Deus is really reverse the incarnation. So if the Word was made flesh in Christ, what dataism, what transhumanism is taking the flesh and turning it back into data, back into symbols, back into words. And so it's an inversion of the incarnation. And so I highlight then and demonstrate that in the nihilistic death of God postmodernist world that we're in, that these are competing narratives that are shaping people's anticipations and their spiritual perspective on the historical project, and that orthodoxy ultimately views transhumanism in its own eschatological lenses. So transhumanism is explicitly eschatological with the singularity and all this different stuff. But orthodoxy then perceives the idea that we're going to technologically augment the DNA of individuals, that we're going to no longer use sexual reproduction. So this is part of post-genderism, which is part of transhumanism, is that sex will totally be for pleasure. So sex between individuals be for pleasure, and all reproduction will be done in a lab through synthetic wombs. That way, CRISPR can be used and genetic engineering and all this stuff to make sure there's no disformities with any of the babies that are being born. So this is literally the future that they describe. So sex is only exactly. It's very Brave New World. And Aldous Huxley, I mean, it's his brother Julian Huxley who coins the term transhumanism in a book called New Bottles for New Wine in like 1957. So, and he was a eugenist. He was the president of the Eugenics Society in London at the time. So transhumanism comes out of eugenics, the idea that we're going to use science to curtail and manipulate the human population. And so when it comes to the Antichrist, now finally finishing up my long winded response to your question, Orthodoxy views transhumanism as setting the stage for Antichrist. Now, you mentioned technology and how technology is used. Orthodoxy would not say that technology is bad in and of itself because it doesn't have a will. And so nothing can be evil that doesn't have a will. Therefore, only angels, demons, and us can truly be quote unquote evil because we can willfully go in opposition to God's will. So technology doesn't do that. But if you wanted to look into like McLuhan's theories about how it augments our sensory ratios, you could certainly make a case there. But we would also say, and St. Paisios famously said in the 1980s, that the computer was going to be a great tool for orthodoxy because orthodoxy was going to spread around the world through technology. So, and we're seeing that to a degree right now. And so St. Paisios described in his eschatological visions, and I've done multiple streams on Orthodox eschatology, is that there's a great world war, and we're potentially on the brink of it. The sign that he says every Orthodox Christian needs to watch out for is when Israel bombs the nuclear facilities of Iran, which, of course, they're threatening to do right now. If that were to happen, according to St. Paisios, this is the first domino and a series of dominoes that is going to lead to America, Israel, and Europe being at war with Russia, Iran, China, and really the rest of the world. And this battle is going to take place over Turkey, and that the battle is really between Turkey and Russia, and Turkey being a vassal state of the Western power, the Israeli American NATO alliance, and they just did that. So the overthrowing of Assad, Turkey made a secret deal, went behind the Russians' back, and made a deal with Israel that essentially they'll take the northern part, Israel can have the southern part, America can have the Kurdish section, and they're going to divvy up Syria. And that's what they did. And Russia was pissed because apparently Turkey had made a promise that they weren't going to do that and help keep Assad in power. So we're already now seeing how Turkey can be perceived as an enemy of Russia when, at least previously, they had a little closer relationship. So the Antichrist, transhumanism, orthodoxy views transhumanism as setting the stage for an entity who is perceived as God, who potentially has supernatural capabilities. Maybe he's the first fully transhuman. Maybe he's hooked up to whatever the AI system that wins. Maybe he's hooked up to it, and therefore he can know what you posted on the internet. He can open up your garage door. He can see what's going on in Rio de Janeiro and bank accounts in Beijing. He can do all this stuff instantaneously because the AI system is doing it, and he can have access to that information. Well, he'll be perceived as a god, and he'll be worshipped as a god. And that's what Orthodoxy believes, is that the Antichrist and the global religion that comes is not where everybody, like all the Muslims, has to renounce their Muslim faith and adopt this global religion. It's that he is the Ahmadi that is promised in Islam. He is the Messiah promised in Judaism. The Antichrist is the false Messiah promised for Christians. He is the false, he is the Buddha that's been promised to the Buddhists. And so he is everything to every group. And then in that sense, he is worshipped by all these different people. And in that sense, it's a perennial ecumenical religion, global religion that is bowed down and worshiped. That is what is meant by the religion of the Antichrist. That is why ecumenism and orthodoxy is so derided and something that is worried about, because we believe that that is one of the ultimate barriers that we have to maintain so that we can see what is the true church versus what is the Antichrist religion. Um, and so the Antichrist will be probably somebody hooked up to this digital system. He will be somebody who will offer protection and healing and food and economic prosperity to people that bow down and get the mark. And so the total technocratic control, the centralization of digital power, the manifestation of a sort of transhuman God, all these things are things that Orthodox priests, monks, theologians, these aren't just my opinions. Obviously, I kind of coalesce everything into my own formation, but this is everything I'm saying has already been discussed by clergy in some form or fashion to be something to be worried about. And why eschatology and the worrying about the end times, yes, everybody's done this through history and everybody's been wrong every time, but the situation is different this time. And the COOF and COVID and some of the medical procedures that were used there was sort of setting the basis, not for, it wasn't the mark, as these people say, or Donald Trump's not the, this is all an antichrist spirit. And we believe that there's been many antichrists. Nero was an antichrist. Napoleon was a sort of an antichrist figure, right? And so there's been many antichrists that are filled with the same spirit, and what they do every time a small antichrist acts, he moves the step closer for global control. And so undermining the monarchies from Napoleon, this was a step further. The Bolshevik Revolution was a step further. And so everything is like leading to, all of them are there in their own sort of mini apocalypses, right? I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution was certainly a sort of apocalypse for the Russian people, but these are culminating into one that is for everybody. It's a global phenomenon. It's not just for, the Russians. It's not just for the victims of Napoleon. It's not just for the Christians under Nero. This is moving. You see, the spirit is expanding, the persecution is expanding, the suffering is expanding, and we believe that this will, um, that the state of affairs that exists today with technology, that we are in a place in which things are totally unimaginable before. I mean, Neuralink right now is giving sight to the blind and allowing paraplegic people to totally control their computers through their mind. And so we're talking, a lot of this stuff, if I said everything I just said 30 years ago, rightfully I could be dismissed. In 2025, if you think everything I said is far-fetched, then you're not paying attention because it's all here.
Yeah, yeah. I feel COVID was like the big moment. I don't know if I can even say that word on here. But COVID was the big moment that where conspiracy theories all of a sudden people started really becoming aware of these things. I want to ask you because and then we can almost wrap it up. I really appreciate it. But these things you just mentioned, it seems to me that throughout history there's clearly some well, I guess the whole Christian story is the story between good and evil, demons and angels, that whole thing. But it does seem that as if there's some metaphysical agency that's moving history and or that's enacting through through people and trying to move the needle in a certain way. I just want to ask you, have you ever come across, and you might have, I'm sure you have, but have you ever come across a lady named Diane Pasulka, and she's kind of in the UFO space?
I have.
Because I thought you might find her interesting for the fact that through her I learned about like these guys like Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, and I got his name written here, Jack Parsons, who are like front runners of like rocketry and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Konstantin Tsiolkovsky being the forefather or whatever of rocket science and
Hmm.
these sort of things. But both of these people claimed contact with celestial and angelic beings, and that they experienced information. They received information from them, which informed their science, which allowed for these amazing technological advancements. And that sort of thing is very eerie, because I know, for example, the Silicon Valley is, to what extent is that a result of psychedelics?
Hmm.
And so it's extremely eerie. It does seem as if there are these agencies that people open themselves up to as well. Well, you're more than as anyone else, you're aware of these things, but it's it's very daunting. I just wanted to know if you knew that
I did know
lady,
that.
because
I'm very well of Jack Parsons, his relationship, because he was friends with Aleister Crowley, and he was part of the sort of Thelemite movement, and he was actually friends with L. Ron Hubbard. So I don't know if you're familiar, but there's actually a great story in which Jack Parsons' girlfriend, L. Ron Hubbard, Jack Parson, and Jack Parsons' girlfriend wanted to conceive the Antichrist, actually. Did you know this? That she wanted to give birth to the Antichrist?
I did not
And,
know this.
and so they performed a sexual ritual, and it ended to L. Ron Hubbard's dismay. So they all apparently took turns and did various things with Jack Parsons' girlfriend, that Jack Parson then was apparently masturbating by himself, and L. Ron Hubbard watched this and was somewhat disgusted, and it actually ended up stealing his girlfriend and leaving Jack Parsons. But yeah, they were into very weird, magical, occult stuff. But to my point earlier, to a secular person that maybe you would speculate about noetic demonic involvement in regards to the development of certain technologies. I mean, how does that occur? Well, through the imagination. Again, it's like orthodoxy and its anthropology is the only thing that gives a very logical and coherent understanding of how that could potentially happen. And it just makes sense. So, yeah, we believe a demon could give somebody insight, and it doesn't mean that the insight is always false. So could a demon provide Jack Parsons with understanding about rocketry that maybe make rocketry more efficient? Yeah. Yeah, that can happen. And in so doing, because it's actually true and more efficient, it makes Jack Parson dive deeper into an occult delusion in which he is then more receptive to new information. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how spiritual warfare works. And pretty soon he's masturbating and trying to conceive the Antichrist with a girlfriend and L. Ron Hubbard.
Great. Thanks a lot. Can I ask you one more thing, not related to transhumanism,
Okay.
not related to any of these things? I just want to know, you've been super consistent these last few years since I've come across you with your streams, and they're always extensive, super well researched. It's clearly that you put a lot of work into the streams throughout the week, and that there's like a really full lecture of and which covers a wide variety of topics um, every week, and you've been doing this for years. At the same time, you managed to write your PhD. I'm kind of entering into the space. I'm busy with my master's thesis now, and I'm also becoming aware of the kind of dead end of traditional academic institutions, and it's guys like you who are kind of shining little lights on the horizon. Kind of, it's clearly there are a bunch of people that are seeing this alternative, seeing that conferences don't need to be organized by universities, and you can create your whole own thing by yourself, and kind of a community is forming through what's the word? I'm thinking Afrikaans now. Through independent
Content creators.
researchers and
Yeah.
academics, and everybody's like, it's clearly something is well, yeah, the space is growing, and so one question is, how do you how did you manage, how do you write a PhD and do the research at the same time, research about other topics, because you research like your streams quite deeply and extensively, and I would love to research other things which are outside of my thesis topic as
Sure.
well. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel almost guilty of like doing it, but I feel the necessity to do it. So I would just personally like to know how you how you manage that.
Right. I want to make a comment also about academic degrees and how they can be utilized. So let me write that down so I can come back to it. In regards to how I did it, well, it takes a lot of effort, and you have to compartmentalize. So I didn't do very many streams. I began my dissertation when I turned it in was 369 pages. Um, and it was, I mean, highly cited. So obviously it's an academic work, but I put a lot of effort to find as many sources that validated my argument as possible. And doing the content, I mean, this is the way that I make money, and my goal is to move forward now with my degree finished and be able to publish it as a book and then write more books. So I actually have a book idea that I want to get done by October. That's going to be much more general and much more popular, much more accessible. Because upon finishing the dissertation, I realized that it's so academic. For those that like really dense reading, they'll love it because it's a kind of new angle on a popular topic. It should be relevant in 5 to 10 years from now. I don't think it'll be dated by then, and it goes into depth that most people probably haven't heard or seen that perspective from. But as a product, as an academic online trying to develop a business, because that's the hard thing is how do you sell education? So I'll come back to that in a second regarding the academic degrees. But how I did it is just work. So the way that I do my research for like when I'm writing a paper, so if I was doing a master thesis or my dissertation, is I spend like 2 months or more just reading as many books as I can on the topic, so that I can develop the thesis.
Sorry about that. I live in South Africa, and you might notice everything is black,
Yeah.
but we've got a thing called load shedding, thanks to our wonderful government, and they switch the power off occasionally, randomly, and this was yeah, definitely not planned.
But I can still
So
hear you.
sorry about
So are
that.
you on the
Yeah,
internet?
is that okay? Yeah, I'm here. The internet has like a backup connection because this is a thing that happens. So I'm so sorry about that. That this is the way uh, we'll end it with you speaking to a black screen. But
It's all good.
yeah, I'm still here. If you want to
Yeah.
finish your thoughts, I'd appreciate it.
What was I lost my thread there? We were talking about research. So yeah, I'll spend uh, I had a bit of a hiccup in my research process because initially I was going to write a dissertation on psychedelics as a new religious movement and form of spirituality. Totally, orthodoxy wasn't going to have anything to do with it. It was just going to talk about like define psychedelic spirituality as its own paradigm. And in my uh, comprehensive examination, essentially a series of 20 to 40 page papers I had to write on various topics, one of which was supposed to be the first chapter of that paper. My committee recommended that I focus on transhumanism because psychedelics, based on the line of argument I was made, I was trying to solve the Soma mystery, for those who know what that is, and then the Kakekion from the Alicenian mysteries, all that different. Anyways, it involved tons of language and stuff like this, and they recommended, it's really interesting what you have, but you have this little section here on transhumanism. Why don't you figure out how you could orient transhumanism into a work? So I feel like it took me an extra year to write my dissertation because I had all these books that I had read on psychedelics, and then had to reread all these books, and it was stuff that I wasn't familiar with, like the history of technology, the history, how medieval perceptions of technology. Like I had to dive into all these different books and articles, um, and then I kind of got my head around the topic, and then you have your outline for the book itself and what each chapter is about, and then I just began going through and writing it, and so that writing process took one full year, and that was 369 pages of an academic dissertation. And that's double spaced with single spaced quotations, like indented quotations. So, anyways, um, doing that and doing content can be very difficult. And like you said, I was doing so for a long period. My week, you got 7 days, and I would decide 4 of those days were content creation. The other 3 were school stuff. And so in between, so I would do a stream, and then maybe it'd be a day or two in between another stream. In those days in between, I was working on school stuff, and then what if the next stream needed like a lot of prep for uh, maybe one day before it was in for the next content or whatnot like that. But then once I started actually writing, um, it I needed a lot more time, and so like for the months of February and March, because my goal was to finish it this semester, I had half of it written, and I was talking with my advisor, and he's like, "Well, you can just defend it in the fall." And I didn't want that. I just got married. I want to focus on building my business. I want to be done with it. I want to build my life. So I wrote 2 chapters and my intro and conclusion in 2 months, and that was like 150 to 170 pages. And I only streamed maybe a handful of times in that period. And I just worked for basically 12 hours, wake up, get caffeinated, get my nicotine, do the little nicotine pouches, and get to work. And I would work, break, food, maybe go to the gym or something. And I did that for every day, probably 8 to 12 hours. Um, and that's what it takes to like write something. Because if you're doing something academic, writing is so much more in depth than just speaking about it. And there's so much more you can say concisely when you're writing, and that's kind of the art of it, is the depth of information you can package in paragraphs. So that was the process. It was difficult to create content and do that at the same time. I don't recommend it as somebody, if you're trying to finish an academic project, I don't recommend it. I felt compelled because it's the only way that I make money. And I am married, and I needed to have some income coming in. So for the whole year while I'm writing the dissertation, I mean, I am doing 2 to 3, sometimes 4 streams a week, usually 2 to 3, and that was essentially the agenda. So I think in regards to like working and then doing some type of academic work, you got to create a timetable for yourself. You got to create your own deadlines. Um, you have to set out space in which you have to get something done. The writing process is not that you write a completed work the first time you do it. It's more like marble and sculpting. And so the way that I view it is once you actually get all your quotations and you write the paper and you get to the end, that's like getting a slab of marble. It's like you actually got the material now to create art with. And now the editing process is refining that so that, the statue of David is actually present within that marble. And that's really what the writing process, I mean, the majority of the time is actually editing, getting everything done, and then going through and reworking everything, and potentially deleting whole pages, and sometimes deleting a whole page and rewriting a wholly different page, whatever it may be that you need to do. So that's kind of the academic process, at least for myself. And I wanted to make one comment regarding the academic degrees because you're talking about seeing the sort of dead end of academia. And I've been talking about this both with other PhD Orthodox Christians that are PhDs, but in general. And so you may have seen like Jordan Peterson has established his own university. And the universities themselves are in trouble because with the accreditation process, and I don't know what South Africa is like, but here in the U.S., it's not super difficult to get accredited if you're teaching an online course. And so, what I think and what I'm planning for the future is that having a social media following is essential social leverage. And so, if you're an academic, everything's about skill sets. So, you have to figure out what your skill set is. So, I don't recommend anybody getting an advanced academic degree because they want to be a teacher. If you want to be a teacher, I don't see, I mean, unless it's already paid for, I don't see why you'd go get a PhD. Because one, those, I mean, that's, I don't know. So you really need to love research. If you love doing research and coming up with like original arguments and trying to present them, then yeah, I could see why a professional degree in the humanities might be beneficial. But what are you going to do with it? And I think the future is becoming a public intellectual. For me, that's the goal, and having my own Orthodox ministry related to it, having some type of platform in which you can express your ideas and also publish. But now with self-publishing like Amazon and all these other sites, you're not even beholden to university publications now to get your words and your ideas out. And so the goal is to influence people, spread your ideas, and develop some type of following so that you can write the same academic books that you'd want to write. And so teaching courses, and when I was talking about the accreditation process, is what I think is happening, and that's what Peterson's doing, is that higher education moving forward, I believe in the next 50 years, is going to be an a la carte method. And so maybe um, what I mean by that, so a la carte, I don't know if that's used in South Africa. That just means you kind of pick your own stuff, right? So if you're at a buffet or you're at somewhere, you kind of pick the things that you want. And we're already seeing that there's people that have like let's say they have an intro to philosophy course, and they're somebody that has their own website, they're a PhD, maybe they're a published book or journal articles, whatever it may be, and they can offer university courses online. They can apply to get accredited. And it's not super difficult. They can get accredited by demonstrating the materials of their course and everything, and that then people can purchase. So a random kid at the University of North Carolina could purchase this other person's philosophy course, take it online, and those credits can actually transfer to North Carolina. And so I think that's going to be the future, is that young people are going to purchase. So that's one of my goals, is to actually offer like 3 or 4 academic accredited courses where it's basically just a university online course, and with all the reading materials and the assignments, and those credits then can transfer. So then people could theoretically, you could begin a process in which maybe you have a collection of Orthodox PhDs with various specialties. Maybe some of it's engineering, maybe some of it's medicine or philosophy, whatever it may be, and they can offer courses, and they you could theoretically have like a center or a company to purchase all these courses. So then young people and old people. So if you're an adult, you can take the course, and maybe you don't need the accreditation, but you just want the information. You can take the course, and then people can begin a la carte purchasing courses from academics on various subjects and then transfer that. So theoretically, they could actually go to university for 2 years and they could have all the credits by taking all these other courses online that are humanity courses or even required courses. Some universities, the required courses you have to take there. But then people can develop bodies of knowledge that are unique to their own interests. I mean, you can't take a course on like Christian apologetics, but theoretically, I myself could create a university course on Christian apologetics and make that a humanities offer that's accredited. And some person, somewhere in the country could decide, you know what, man, I'm Christian. My university doesn't have anything like that. I'll take that and I'll transfer as free humanities credits. So I think that that is kind of the future of academic degrees. And I don't know what your program's like, but I've in the academy, I've witnessed so many PhDs that their love is not research. Their love is the environment of academia. Their love is the environment of the professionalism. And their goal, and a lot of people I went to school with, their goal is to get in the bureaucracy of the universities. So to get in the
Yeah,
administration
kind of like you
department.
mentioned in the beginning, your initial idea of like having the suitcase and the jacket and going in, kind of being the professor
Right.
more than like the actual
Right. But
content
I've
of the
always
work.
loved the research. And that was and you probably have met people too, is like they go and get these graduate degrees or even a PhD and they don't love the research. They don't their goal is to maybe do the research as an assignment, get the PhD, maybe get it published, and then get a job somewhere. And then they'll have the title and they can live the life that they want to live. My love was the research. And if you love the research, whether you're in engineering or medicine or philosophy or whatever humanities, then there's a place for you because that's the skill set of an academic. The skill set of an academic is not the ability to sit in a bureaucratic office and make sure all the emails are responded to on time. That's not the point of a PhD. And so the economy we're moving into with this technology, especially with AI, is you have to be a human with a unique skill set that an AI can't repeat. And the difference between me and an AI as an educator is that I have my own opinion. And so developing your body of knowledge so that your opinion actually has weight is the only differentiating factor between you and an AI system. And so you have to realize that it's about skill sets. Whether you work on cars or you're a plumber or if you're an academic, you have to have a real skill set. That's either writing and publishing and or educating or researching. You have to be efficient at one of these things or it's pointless. There's no reason to get these academic higher degrees. And that's the problem with it is that it's flooded now. There's so many people with them that they don't mean the same anymore, but they mean but in regards to a moniker and like my title, Dr. David Patrick Harry, it's a useful title, especially if you're wanting to do the public intellectual thing, because it comes with a sense of official certification. Um, yeah, it's something to leverage, and so I think everybody needs to think about like what is the goal, and just fleeing into the graduate schools because you're not ready to get a job is not the solution. You have to figure out like what your passion is and what you're going to use your skill set for, and you can absolutely monetize an academic skill set. It just to monetize an academic skill set outside of the university, you are going to have to build a following.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. It's been quite pressing this topic, and I've been having a few conversations about people regarding this whole and I've been seeing it. I've been seeing people succeed in this whole field. Being independent academics, and it's quite clear that all sorts of models are opening up for people to follow and to structure
Right.
their
And all those people that are able to do that have a quality skill set. I may not agree with what their opinions are. That's not my point. Is that they do their own research and they write their books, and that's the only way you can get an audience is you have to be engaging and you have to create things. And so it is a kind of Darwinian survival of the fittest in regards to the market of attention, because that's really what it is. And you're competing with, if you have a YouTube channel and maybe you have, I'm not talking about you specifically, but anybody out there, maybe you only have one subscriber. You have to realize the game and the marketplace you're in is you're competing with Netflix. You're competing with the NBA playoffs. You're competing with, because everything is the market of attention. This is the age of information. And therefore, if it's information, you got to get somebody's eyeballs to look at the information. And that is the currency we swim in. And the ability to garner attention is more valuable than money right now.
Why? Dr. David Patrick Carey, thank you so much.
Thank you
I
very much,
appreciate your time. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really do appreciate it. It means the world to me. It's been extremely valuable. I'm sure the people who are going to see it are going to get a lot of value out of it.
I hope so.
I surely have. I'm going to refer to this quite a few times. And yeah, thank you so much. Once again, congratulations on the PhD
Thank
and
you very
also on
much.
your marriage. That's
Thank you.
such a blessing. It's wonderful to watch these things happen as an outsider and see see these things kind of take shape. Like I said, as a fly on the wall. But yeah, I really do appreciate your time.
Well,
And
thank you, brother. I
yeah,
appreciate you having me on. All right. And if anybody wants to follow my stuff, I have two YouTube channels. I'll be rebranding and starting totally new types of content on a YouTube channel called Dr. David Patrick Carey. And then I have Church of the Eternal Logos, which is going to continue to be my sort of educational platform. The other channel is going to engage much more in cultural current events, whatever's viral, and more giving my opinion to try to engage with mostly non-Christians. My goal is to try to expand the audience because mine's so relegated right now to Orthodox Christians mostly, to have a new platform that is more expansive and open to a much wider variety of people and backgrounds. And then if people are more interested in my ideas, they can go to Church of the Eternal Logos, which is going to be and is right now my educational platform and how I talk about current events from an Orthodox perspective. So the goal is the personal brand will be less explicitly apologetic about Orthodoxy, and then Church of the Eternal Logos, that's the point of it.
great. I will be keeping an eye on both of those channels. Also for the upcoming book and books.
Yes.
I'm very interested to read the dissertation, and I'm quite looking forward to this book you'll be writing, which will be a bit more digestible for everyone. I think it's quite a pressing issue. I think the topic you chose, or perhaps that chose you for your dissertation, is yeah, right place, right time. I think this difference between this apotheosis of the transhumanism and the theosis of Orthodox Christianity is that's something that just needs to be spoken about more everywhere. This idea of theosis is something that I feel a lot of people that was the thing that turned me on when I heard that, oh yeah, this is actually what God intends for us. This is actually what's been this is such an organic and innate pull in every single human. It just makes a lot of sense. It's a sobering thought, and yeah, I'm very happy you made an official document and place where we can actually go and read more about it. So yeah, thank you for the work you're doing, and thank you for your voice. It really means a lot, and you're definitely having an impact. So
Thank you very much,
thanks.
brother. I appreciate those kind words.